I've had a number of experiences in my life related to the different events that happen around Christmas and Easter and all of those. When I pastored at Goshen First United Methodist Church, we did the thing like the Assembly of God does. We did a big Christmas and Easter pageant. And we had about 120 people in the cast and live animals and all of this kind of stuff. And it was this big event talking about the birth of Christ. And as we began to set that up, because it was written by the person that was the music director at the church there, he and his wife wrote the script and put all the music together, and we did the whole piece. And it was a neat event. I mean, it was this exciting thing that began to happen. And I often thought about it because we depicted the shepherds out on the hillside and the angels coming and speaking to them and telling them that Christ had been born. Now, the piece of it was we actually sang a song, and it was this event that began to happen in that. And they sang the song, and then the shepherds went off, and they went to find Jesus in the manger, and then the wise men came. I actually got to play one of the wise men. That's the only time in my life I've ever played a wise man, because everybody knew me better than that, every place else I was at. No, I'm just kidding. But the situation is, so I got to play one of the wise men. I actually got to come, get dressed up as a king and come in, and I carried the gold in and kneeled down in front of baby Jesus, and I did that process. It's interesting how God decided to announce to the world that Christ was being born. Now, I live in the world of the 21st century, where when something is announced, it gets announced in all kinds of big ways so that people know all about it. I mean, I don't watch very much television, but what little television I watched, I knew all about the Black Friday sales that were coming. People were talking about it. It was the big deal. Everybody was saying things. But Jesus, the most important thing that may have ever happened in the history of the world, got announced by a few angels coming and singing to a bunch of obscure shepherds in a field. I'll think about that one for a minute. In all the ways that God could have presented this experience, He chose a few shepherds. And then He put a star in the sky for a bunch of astronomers and wise men in a far country to see, to make a trip to come and visit this God. Now, some folks think that trip that the wise men made was about 1,000 miles by camel. Now, the farthest I've ever ridden a horse was 3.5 miles one day during a John Wesley event at one of the little rural churches I pastored in history, and I was sore for the next 5 days. So I don't know how you would ride a camel for 1,000 miles across desert in that process. And as a matter of fact, you got to remember, these guys were wise men or kings or people that were carrying an entourage. So it would have been a situation that they wouldn't have just come with. We see them depicted as 3 guys on camels, and that's the end of it. They wouldn't have come like that. Most historians believe that they would have actually had an entourage of over 300 people, probably including a military escort, because the roads weren't safe, and so they would have had a military escort, the whole kind of thing. And they came in that process 2 to 3 months just to prepare, and maybe another 3 or 4 months of travel, because going that amount of a journey was not very easy. So picture this host of distinguished gentlemen riding along looking for a child who was supposedly born to be the King of the Jews. Now, there were a couple things that happened. God, in His ultimate wisdom, didn't announce it this birth of his child, of the Son of Man, he didn't announce him in Jerusalem. That would have been like, he didn't announce him in New York City or Los Angeles or Washington, D.C. or one of the big cities of the world. He announced him in a little obscure village of Bethlehem. Little obscure place. Now, he also announced, he told him in the Old Testament where it was going to happen at. I mean, so he set it all up. He said, here's the place to look. Here's the place that's going to take place. Here's what's going to happen. Matthew 2nd we're told that his star in the east and they'd come to worship him. And then they stopped ahead because they were heads of state, and it wasn't appropriate if they didn't come to the correct place. So they went to Jerusalem, and they went to the king's chambers, and they said, "Help us out here. We didn't have our GPS, and we got lost on the trip. We see the star, but we don't know exactly where it's going." It's not like the pictures. I think that the star was there and it was directing them where to go, but it wasn't this laser light coming out of this little manger in Bethlehem going up to the star that said, "Neat, neat, neat, neat. Here it is. Come down and see it." And so they stopped and they said, "What do you know about this king?" Now, I've often thought about it. Because I'm sure those shepherds, the kings probably came a little bit later, and matter of fact, most people believe they didn't come for maybe as long as a year. That Jesus, at this point, might have been a year and a half old by the time the shepherds got to him, or the kings got to him. But in the midst of that process, those shepherds that had that experience and went to see Jesus weren't quiet. And they went telling the story. I mean, if you're out in the field at night, think about it for just a second, and you had a whole host of angels standing up in front of you and telling you about this wonderful event that was taking place, and then you go see it is true, are you going to keep your mouth shut about it? Probably not. As a matter of fact, we don't keep our mouth shut about things that aren't as important as that. I mean, think of the things that we tell people about. I mean, there are just moments that I cringe at stuff that I've told people about in the past. You with me? Man, I'd like to take that one back, Wish I hadn't told that one. But here the shepherds were. So these shepherds, I'm sure, went all over the place and told about this experience that they had had. I'm sure they went to Jerusalem at some point in time and told about that experience. And so there they were, and what did the leadership of Jerusalem do in the midst of that process? Did they go out and check it out themselves? No. It wasn't important enough for them to do. As a matter of fact, it wasn't important enough when even these kings came along and said, "We've seen a star, do you know where he's at?" It wasn't important for them to get up and go out and go with them to try to find this baby Jesus. It wasn't until after they thought about it a little bit and they said, "Well, if there's this king, if there's this baby that's born king who's going to be the new king, I think I better probably get rid of him now before he becomes an adult and creates a problem for me." And so they sent out, they sent out the troops to kill all the children under 2. Now, help us to understand this. 1 Corinthians 1 tells us in this passage that God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise, and God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong, and He chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that were not to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before Him. It wasn't a big event. We've made it into a big event. As we've relived it and we rehashed it over the years. But wasn't a big event at that point in time. It was a small event where a baby was born that was going to impact the world in a mighty way. Now, for centuries, the churches believed that they needed to impress people to bring them to Christ. And believe me, I love to visit beautiful churches, don't you? Matter of fact, one of the things that I still have on my bucket list is, one of these days I'm going to go to Italy and going to go visit all of the churches in Rome. Can't wait, go to the Vatican City and go to St. Peter's and visit that. We love, as we travel around many times, we like to stop at the cathedrals that are around in the different cities, and just to go in and if you go, one of the greatest ones, and it's crazy, but one of the best ones is in a place called Jasper, Indiana. There's a cathedral in Jasper, Indiana, that has the greatest Stations of the Cross carvings I've ever seen outside of Paris, France. I mean, they're marvelous. I can't believe how intricate and how beautiful they are as we walked around that church in the midst of that. And we'd love to visit those churches. But you know what? Going to those beautiful churches is not the best experience I've ever had with Jesus. The best experience I've ever had with Jesus were those moments where we waited on God to come. Invited Him. We've turned church into an event, right? Happens every Sunday at 9:30. We sing a few songs. We stand up and do some things. We make it an event. But the places where we really encounter God is when we come into His presence. And the place that happened for those shepherds when they visited Jesus was they walked into His presence. And they experienced His love. They experienced Him there in the manger. The greatest thing that happened to the wise men was when they came in to God's presence. The best thing that happens to us is when we come into God's presence. High school, for me, 1968, long time ago. Sorry, young people. 1968, we went to a place called the All Welcome Church in Cocoa Beach. It was a non-event place. It was an old building that a few of the hippies of the day had gotten saved, and they started a little church, and it didn't happen on Sunday morning, it happened on Friday night. And there was a few guys sitting around with some guitars, and we'd sit and sing for a while, and then we'd just sit and be silent for a while, and then we'd sit and sing for a while, and then somebody would stand up and talk a little bit, and then somebody'd sit down, and we used to go, and it would last about 4 hours. A lot of it was just sitting in the presence of God. Because amazingly enough, every Friday night, God visited that place. What's the moment when God comes and visits us? Because we waited on God. We gave God that moment of our time and said, I want to be in your presence. We have a tough time waiting. I didn't like it on Black Friday when I had to wait for an hour to buy Bath and Body Works. When they had to wait to take my $15. I thought, well, I should have come back yesterday. There wasn't anybody in line yesterday. We're not very good at waiting. We're not very good at waiting. Let's get it done quick. Oh man, let's make it happen. Let's get the, how many things can we get packed into a day? Better not say this too loud. It's like going on vacation with my wife. I have to come back from vacation to have a rest. All the things she wants to pack into it, Oh, well, let's go see this. Go see this. We got this whole agenda we have to get through in the midst of that. Sometimes we just need to rest in the presence. Rest in the presence. sometimes on Sunday we just need to rest in the presence. If we really believe God's present in our worship, there's just a time when we rest in it. And we allow God to be present in us. That's what the shepherds did. That's what the wise men did. But it's not what the powers that be did. So as we experience Christmas this year, as we move ourselves down to the love of God, as we experience what happens, and everybody gets all upset because Christmas isn't going to bring us what we thought we would get, or we're going to have conflict with some family members that are going to come who didn't vote the way we did, or we're going to have packages that didn't arrive. But you know what? God isn't out to impress us. He just wants to love us. And He asks us just to wait in His presence. And to be willing to hear His word. I want to close with a illustration out of wasn't me, but it was a young person that I knew that was on a missionary team, and they'd been invited to Russia and to go into the orphanages to teach about Jesus, about Christianity. It was Christmas time, and they taught the story of Christ's birth at the orphanage, and everyone listened in amazement because most of the kids had never heard it before, you know. It was right after the opening of the Soviet Union. And one of the missionaries wrote, "We gave the children some materials and instructed them to create the manger scene that they'd just heard about. And they all went until I got to one table, and she said, there I met with little Misha." And he sat. He looked to be about 6 years old, and he had finished the project. She says, "I looked in the little boy's manger. I was startled to see not one but two babies in the manger. And I called for a translator, and I asked why. And looking at his completed manger scene, the child began to repeat the story accurately until he came to the part where Mary put the baby Jesus in the manger. And then Misha started ad-libbing his own ending to the story. And he said, when Mary laid the baby in the manger, Jesus looked at me," meaning Misha, "and he asked me if I had a place to stay. And I told him I had no mama and papa. So no, I don't have a place to stay. So Jesus told me I could stay with him. So I got in the manger. And Jesus looked at me and told me I could stay with him forever. Put his hand over his face. Misha dropped to the table. And his shoulders shook as he sobbed and sobbed. Because he found someone who would never abandon him, never abuse him, and would stay with him forever. Amen. It's Jesus. The little child will teach them. Just waiting in his presence. All he wanted was to spend a few moments with him. That's the message we have for the world. All the people that are looking for somebody to do something for them, somebody to pick up the pieces of their lives, guess what? Jesus already did. Let's pray. Lord, there are just some times that we don't know exactly how to share what you've done for us. Because we get lost in all the stuff. But Lord, we pray that today we just come into your presence. Amen.